So how do we actually work with our internal village? Now that we know a little bit more about how it was created, how much our childhood and our past experiences, our culture impacted the way our village was built, and also how much the fact of just being human and the way the mind works and the way it's evolved over all the years that we've existed as a species. Now that we know all of that and we realize that there's a lot that we didn't choose in our village, how do we now work with all of these different villagers, all of these different parts of us? And one of the ways that I think is really important to work with our village is to understand two core rules of our internal village. The first rule is we didn't choose how our village was built. So that's something that we've already covered. But I'm repeating it again because it's so important, because I think that when we realize that, we can bring a lot more understanding, give ourselves a lot more of a break than when we think that we should just choose everything about how we respond or how we are as people. And the second rule that's really important to understand is that we can't get rid of any of the villagers. They are here to stay. And we can't ignore them either, because they're a part of us. And it's almost like if you think of a real village and you think of a villager who's there, actually has a role in our internal village. And each villager has a job description. And so when we can understand what is the actual job description of this villager, it can really help us to work with them in a different way than to try to ignore them or suppress them or just distract ourselves from even hearing their message or feeling what they're trying to tell us. So when we see them in a way of, okay, there's a reason that this villager is there, it makes sense given my past, and also maybe there's still a message that this villager is trying to give me. So for example, a villager who can be very critical of us, so again, critical villager, probably evolved based on something that we experienced growing up. It can be a parent who's very critical with us, and then we kind of interiorize that voice. Or it can be feeling like it's my fault that my parents aren't taking care of me the way I want them to, or the way I need. And so it's blaming ourselves instead of blaming our parents. That can be sort of the reason why that villager was created. And today it can be a way of trying to keep us safe. So for example, if I'm really critical with myself before I do a video, that can be a way that this villager thinks that I will make sure that I prepare properly, that I do things well. So it can be a protecting way, a way to protect me. And that's actually what most of the villagers are about. Most of the villagers in our village are about either trying to protect us in some way or trying to motivate us in some way. It's just that often it's not very effective. It's often not very helpful, because we know from research that when we're really critical with ourselves, yeah, sometimes it can keep us safe, it can protect us, it can even motivate us to do better, but it's actually not that helpful compared to how much the cost that it has on us and how difficult it is to live with villagers who are constantly being critical and us believing that that is the truth about us. We often actually stay stuck because there's a critical villager that shows up, but then there's a villager who feels really scared and is afraid that if I do make a mistake, if I do try this new thing and I make a mistake, then this critical villager is going to beat me up, is going to be really harsh on me. And so that often keeps us stuck. But when we know that these villagers are actually they're not out to get us. They're trying to protect us, or they're trying to protect us, or they're trying to motivate us, sorry. So they're trying to do what they think is best for the village. And we give them the benefit of the doubt, and we realize, that it makes sense that they're showing up. We can realize, okay, well, I don't need to believe what this critical villager is telling me. It's okay that there's a part of me that is critical, but it's also doesn't mean that that's the entire truth. And I don't need to believe everything that my mind is telling me, or that that happens in my village. It's just a result of both my past, my culture, and my childhood, and also just the way that the human mind works. But it's actually not that personal, and it's not even something I need to allow to take over the village. And so what happens when we start to approach things in this way is that we can start to notice that, okay, there's a villager who's critical and they're trying to take over. We can say hello to them and be like, okay, hello, critical villager. I know that you're just trying to take care of me. And right now, I'm going to choose to do this thing anyway because it matters to me. So that's the way that we can start to work with these villagers, is to notice them, maybe even give them a name. I find that that can be really helpful. And then thank them for trying to take care of us in some way or trying to protect us. And then choose to do what matters to us anyway, despite that critical villager being there or despite that really scared villager showing up. We don't need to actually take these villagers so seriously. And that's the really beautiful part of learning to work with our internal village, is realizing that these villagers are going to show up, and often they're quite predictable as well. It's quite predictable that a scared villager will show up when we do something new, or a self-sabotaging villager will show up when we're doing something that feels really vulnerable or that we don't want to do. And so starting to work with these parts of us and recognizing them when they show up, and then leaving a bit of a space between this villager showing up and what we do next, is really a way of realizing that we don't need to let those villagers take over the village so much anymore. That we can actually choose from a different place. And maybe that different place is the wise village chief who's able to listen to all of these different villagers, listen to all the different points of views that are coming up when we need to make a decision, for example, and recognize that it's okay for all these different villagers to be there, and maybe there's even some validity in their opinions, but that there's also this wise part of me that can now choose how I want to respond in a situation. And the more that we can start to do this, the more we have the capacity to put a space or to create a pause between a villager shows up, but we don't just let them take over the village. We actually choose whether or not that villager is useful in the situation that we're in. And then we can make a real choice based on what really matters to me right now and what kind of person do I want to be.